So at one point, as I was looking ahead at the path that I wanted to follow and seeing that it was going to be long, difficult, and I wasn't that familiar with it, I knew I needed role models, examples to follow to know how to pursue this path. But of course, what I'm talking about here is a career path. And one of my first role models was Lisa Meitner. And she received her PhD in Germany, I believe, in 1905, and actually was one of the scientists to discover nuclear fission, so the physics principle that allowed for the nuclear weapons to be made in World War II. She even found a new element, protactinium, which I'm sure is everyone's favorite element. And the research that actually discovered fission and understood it was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1944 to her collaborator, of course, Otto Hahn. She was not recognized. And I remember, I think in a high school physics textbook, this picture of her. And there are other pictures of her, but for whatever reason, this is the one that's really stood out in my mind, where she's just kind of looking a bit blasé out into the distance, holding a cigarette. She does not look like a very happy person in that image. And of course, everyone's life is very complex, and I hope that she was a very happy person and had much satisfaction in life. But that was one of my first role models. A female physicist who really didn't have the recognition that she should have had while she was alive, and who maybe looked a little annoyed by it. At least that was my thought. So in college then, I looked to my professors, and I saw that so many of my professors seemed to be perfect. They showed up to class, they filled chalkboard after chalkboard with math I couldn't really follow. But then I had a professor who would be going through doing out the derivations on the board and would sit back and look at it and say, oh, I've made a mistake somewhere. And would just look at it, trying to find his mistake. And I remember the moment that this happened because it was so wonderful for me of, oh, I could do this. I can't show up and be flawless and perfect, but to show up, do my best, and occasionally pause and go, something isn't right here. That I could do. So as I continued down this path, I looked ahead to the grad students who were starting grad school and how they had pursued that path, and then on to the people who had finished their PhDs and were postdocs. And in grad school, I even knew someone who had gone straight from grad school into a faculty position at a small liberal arts college, and had talked to him about that and decided that I wanted to do a similar thing. So then I was a professor. Great. Now what? And I remember so clearly looking around to see who my role models would be. Okay, there were senior faculty at the college, but it seemed like they were really getting meaning and happiness in their life from houses, family, relationships, children, and that didn't really appeal to me. It's like, well, how do I get meaning from this thing I'm doing every day in my job? And maybe that wasn't possible. And so not only did I not see anymore a role model of how do I get from A to B, I couldn't even figure out what B was anymore. Where am I going next? And that's kind of where I was, this somewhat existential crisis of where do I go next to, pursue happiness and meaning in my life. And then in 2015, I met a bunch of Tibetan monks, and I saw that they seemed quite happy. And they were brilliant. They were effectively the grad students or PhDs, of Drupal Noseling. And unlike the grad students I knew in physics, they seemed happy and mentally stable and weren't turning to substances or other unhealthy behaviors. So they were wonderful, but could they be my role model? Because I couldn't ordain as a Tibetan monk at Drupal Noseling. That wasn't going to be a possibility. But they were very inspiring. And that was something that really stuck with me, this idea of, oh, this is a completely different path, but one that might actually be leading to happiness and meaning. And then I met vulnerable children and started watching the BBCs online. And then I visited the Abbey and met all these fantastic people who could actually be my role models. Not specifically in ordaining, but even just in how one practices day to day, one's behavior with others, how one offers service with this incredible motivation and brings that motivation of benefiting others, transforming one's mind into everything that one does. And so I took that back and tried to bring that into my job. And obviously, at a certain point, I decided instead to come here and ordain. And so I continue now to have these incredible role models. And after being ordained now for 2 years, I haven't had that what now thought. And I think that's because the goal is so big. And it's quite far away. I know where I'm aiming. I have this clear direction, but it's going to take many lifetimes, many eons to get to that goal. Of course, what is that? Generating uncontrived bodhicitta, realizing emptiness, attaining Buddhahood. And so now being here, not only are the senior monastics my role models and how to move towards this direction, and our teachers, but I see that even our teachers have their role models, their teachers, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And so I wanted to share some passages talking about this, first from volume 5. And this is from a section titled Bodhisattvas as Inspiring Role Models. The examples of bodhisattvas' lives and their marvelous activities inspire us to want to become like them. Personally speaking, thinking about the bodhisattvas encourages me, this is from His Holiness the Dalai Lama's perspective, to practice more than does thinking about the Buddhas. If I thought just of the Buddha's qualities without being attentive to the qualities of bodhisattvas on the training paths, I could become disheartened, thinking that the Buddhas are too high and I can never catch up to them. For example, when I viewed Tsongkhapa as an emanation of Manjushri, I think he had all those marvelous qualities because he was the emanation of a Buddha. But when I regard him as an ordinary person who sincerely took on serious spiritual practice and gained high realizations in his lifetime, I am encouraged. Since both of us began as ordinary beings, if I practice just as he did, I will become like him. And I find this really inspiring to again see that I can always have role models, even if I don't have senior monastics with me to look for, because I can look to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And a second passage, this time in volume 1, approaching the Buddhist path, says, in seeking out role models, I, Chudran, look to the Buddha himself. In sutra passages and in artwork, he is depicted in a variety of situations, sitting and meditating peacefully, speaking fearlessly to a crowd of non-Buddhists, tending to the needs of a sick monk, talking to merchants, courtesans, royalty, and paupers. He speaks with men and women, monastics and lay. He knows how to address intellectuals, wandering aesthetics, non-believers, the grieving, the impoverished, and criminals. The Buddha is everyone's person. He fits no stereotype. The Buddha engaged in so many diverse activities that he can serve as a role model for many different kinds of people with diverse interests. So I now rejoice that I have such incredible role models, and I see that in my own mind and heart, there's this sense of contentment that comes from this. No longer trying to say, okay, I have to find that person I want to grow up to be like in 10, 20, or 30 years, but now seeing, okay, I am on this path, I know where it leads, I need to make effort, but I am convinced that I have good role models and that I can really rely on them to be an example of what my behavior, relationships, and ideally, eventually my mind can really be like. So this is a direction that gives me happiness and brings meaning to my life. And I also rejoice that all of us here have the opportunity to be role models to others, both in person and online.